President Donald Trump has said his administration would start sending letters to countries probably on Friday to identify the tariff rates they would face on imports to the United States. In fact, Trump says 10 to 12 countries will get letters by Friday and will range in value from 60 to 70% and 10 to 20%. Meanwhile, countries will start paying tariffs from the 1st of August. Listen in.
We have a couple of other deals, but my inclination is to send a letter out and saying what tariff they're going to be paying. It's just much easier. We have, far more than 170 countries. And how many deals can you make? And you can make good deals, but they're very much more complicated. I'd rather, and I've been like this from the beginning, I'd rather send out a letter saying this is what you're going to pay to do business in the United States.
Staying with the U.S., where the House of Representatives passed Republicans' sweeping tax and spending legislation, sending the so-called Big Beautiful Bill to President Donald Trump's desk. Now, the measure's passage following an all-night legislative session during which Republicans, in fact, quashed internal opposition, comes just before Trump's deadline of July 4 and also reflects his sustained sway, in fact, over the party. Here's Trump for you.
We're sort of celebrating like the biggest bill of its kind ever signed, and it's going to make this country into a rocket ship. It's going to be really great.
Mr. President, he met with a lot of House Republicans yesterday. Slight confidence, yes.
I think when you go over the bill, it was very easy to get him to a yes. We went over that bill, and point after point, biggest tax cut in history, great for security, great on the southern border. Immigration is covered. We covered just about everything. Again, it's the biggest bill ever signed of its kind.
Trade talks between India and the United States are heating up in Washington, with both sides, in fact, pushing towards a potential interim agreement likely to be unveiled in a day or two. Now, this agreement follows months of negotiations catalyzed by U.S. President Donald Trump's historic tariff announcement on the 2nd of April. Now, since then, both sides have reached the necessary compromises. My colleague Natasha gets you this report.
Well, there was so much attention, as you covered earlier in the program, on the big, beautiful bill in US Congress, and that's going to be signed July 4th. I'm not sure that'll be accompanied by the Indo-US trade deal as well. But yes, there's a good chance that this bill, the deal will be ironed out before that July 9th deadline. So somewhere between July 4th and July 9th is my guess. But there is increasingly a lot of positive noises that we're hearing from both the American side and the Indian side, but with necessary compromises, as you mentioned earlier. While India is seeking greater market access to its labor-intensive goods, the US wants more duty concessions on its agricultural products and its dairy products. And time again, we hear that's where the challenges have stayed, because India is very wary about allowing these big American farming companies to come in to compete with farmers in India who traditionally have small holdings and a lesser number of cattle. They won't be able to compete, and the Indian government is trying to protect them. In fact, historically, dairy and agriculture is kept out of trade deals even with other countries like Australia and the UK. So that's been the sticking point, but apparently there have been some progress on that front, and there's a chance that India might allow apples and nuts in, but still draw those red lines on products like wheat.
The PM addressed the Indian community in Port of Spain, where he in fact spoke about their ancestral links to India, praised their cultural contributions, and also said it was an honor, in fact, to bring with him a replica of the Ram Mandir and holy water from the river Sarayu in Ayodhya. He recalled the community's earlier gesture of sending shillas and sacred water for the temple's construction. Listen into what PM Modi says, followed by a very special report by my colleague Urvashi.
They left their soil, but not their soul. They were not just migrants. They were messengers of a timeless civilization. Their contributions have benefited this country culturally, economically, and spiritually.
Well, Namaste, New Delhi TV. I'm Urvashi Tiwari Rupnarayan, and I'm coming to you from the National Cycling Center in Cuba, Trinidad and Tobago. Of course, your Prime Minister Narendra Modi would have left Ghana on an official visit. He came to Trinidad and Tobago also on an official visit, and when he departs here, he'll be heading to Buenos Aires. Now, his visit here is very significant. You may ask yourselves why. Well, Trinidad and Tobago has the highest population of members of the Indian diaspora in the Caribbean and also South America. We're averaging at just over 500,000, which is half of our population are members of the Indian diaspora. Now, of course, that is significant because we have those members in various fields. They are in education, they are in the legal fraternity, they are esteemed doctors, they are lawyers, and of course, our Prime Minister, Kamala Persad-Bissessar, is the first female Prime Minister of our country, but she's also the first female Prime Minister of Indian origin.
Russian President Vladimir Putin told US President Donald Trump on Thursday that he won't back down from his goals in Ukraine. Now, this comes a day after Washington said it would, in fact, halt some weapon shipments to Kiev. The leader's hour-long call, in fact, comes as Moscow intensifies its attacks on Ukraine, pounding cities with drones and missile strikes. Meanwhile, we get you what Donald Trump had to say on this.
We had a call. It was a pretty long call. We talked about a lot of things, including Iran. And we also talked about, as you know, the war with Ukraine. And I'm not happy about that. I'm not happy about that.
Progress with him on a deal with Ukraine? Do you feel like you made any progress?
No, I didn't make any progress with him today at all.
Shifting focus to West Asia, where White House Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is in fact planning to meet Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi in Oslo next week to restart nuclear talks. Now, this is according to Western media report. Now, why is this significant? It's significant because a final date has not been sent and neither country has publicly confirmed the meeting. However, if it happens, it would mark the first direct talks since President Trump ordered an unprecedented military strike on 3 of Iran's nuclear facilities only last month. Over in Washington, the United States has imposed sanctions against a business network that smuggles Iranian oil disguised as Iraqi oil, as well as sanctions targeting a Hezbollah-controlled financial institution. Now, the State Treasury Department has, in fact, made this announcement. The network of companies run by Iraqi businessman Salim Ahmed Said has been buying and shipping billions of dollars worth of Iranian oil disguised or blended with, in this case, as Iraqi oil since at least 2020, the statement read. We got breaking news coming in. A statement from the army on Operation Sindoor, in fact, where it has said there was a China-Pak nexus during Operation Sindoor, and China, in fact, provided all possible support to Pakistan. It's a big statement coming in, but that's not only what it says. It further says, and I'm quoting here, Pakistan's like a live laboratory for China. That's correct. The statement says that Beijing has, in fact, been using Islamabad as a live laboratory. In fact, it goes on to further say that 81% of the military hardware that Pakistan is using is Chinese. We, of course, saw that from the failed air defense systems that were targeted by India. And, you know, the jets also, we saw fragments of unburst missiles fallen on this side of the territory. That's a big breaking news and a big statement, in fact, coming in from India. Moving on. Foreign Affairs Advisor to Bangladesh's interim government, Mohammad Tawheed Hussain, on Thursday indicated that the country's interim government is actively pursuing the extradition of former PM Sheikh Hasina from India, a year after her ousting from the country. Now, as this happens, meanwhile, Bangladesh parties are discussing a caretaker election government. My colleague Saurabh gets you the insider details on this.
Well, Bangladesh is discussing major reforms and constitutional reforms as it prepares for elections, and currently there's an interim government in place. But during elections, Bangladesh has always had the practice of having a caretaker government, something that was abolished a few years ago, and that verdict was of course upheld by several court orders, but that has also been challenged. Now, what's the difference between this interim government and a caretaker government? Well, for starters, this caretaker government is usually installed only for elections, and whether the interim government under Muhammad Yunus will continue for these elections, or whether there will be a caretaker government led by a non-partisan chief advisor, is something that is still up for discussion. As of now, it seems Muhammad Yunus will see Bangladesh through these elections, and then of course major reforms etc. can all take place simultaneously. But there is discussion, especially on the National Consensus Commission, about whether the caretaker government practice should be brought back and whether a non-partisan caretaker government should be installed that is acceptable to all parties. There were provisions for that. Should they go back to these old provisions? This is something that's being discussed, and that's why there is a certain element of doubt of whether the elections will be held under Muhammad Yunus's interim government or whether there will be a caretaker government. That was usually the practice before it was abolished in Bangladesh.
An Indian origin man has been arrested for allegedly attacking his co-passenger during a flight from Philadelphia to Miami. Now, a video that has gone viral, which is also on your screens right now, in fact shows Ishant Sharma, a 21-year-old resident of Newark, and Keanu Evans involved in a fight on a Frontier Airlines flight on the 30th of June. Now, New Jersey resident Ishant Sharma received a black eye and a court date after he got involved in an unprovoked mid-flight attack on a fellow passenger, but it ending up backfiring. Now, the clip shows Sharma and Evans, as you see right there, trying to grab each other's necks, with fellow passengers asking them to stop. Indian software engineer Soham Parekh has been accused of moonlighting at multiple startups simultaneously. Now, allegedly also deceiving employers and gaming the startup hiring ecosystem. Many experts are suggesting that it is one of the most audacious employment scams in recent history. In fact, the software engineer has now broken his silence and defended his stance, saying he is not proud of what he's done, and also emphasized that financial stress, in fact, forced him to take these measures. He also added that no one really likes to work 140 hours a week. Staying with the US, where a wildfire in wilderness area of central California exploded in size as dry, hot weather Thursday, in fact, raised the fire risk for large portions of the state ahead of the July 4th holiday. The Madre Fire, as it's being called, has become California's largest blaze so far this year, ripping through grasslands after breaking out Wednesday in southeastern San Luis Obispo County. It also swiftly grew to more than 55 square miles or 142 square kilometers. There was just 5% containment. Shifting focus eastwards, where Russia has accepted credentials of the new Afghan ambassador to Moscow on Thursday. Now, this marks it as the first country, in fact, to extend diplomatic recognition to the Taliban since the Islamist movement retook power in the South Asian country in 2021. Back to Washington, where national defense areas will soon cover nearly one-third of U.S. border with Mexico, empowering soldiers to arrest people who cross the border illegally. President Donald Trump's declaration of a national emergency at the border has in fact allowed the American army to sidestep a law prohibiting the military from civilian law enforcement. Now, it has gotten a mixed reception from hunters, hikers, and humanitarian groups who fear being locked out of public lands across a cherished landscape. Meanwhile, listen into the U.S. Border Patrol and what it has to say.
I want to make it extremely clear. Anyone who enters the United States illegally will be removed. Not necessarily just back to Juarez or to Chihuahua or right across the border. but also into southern Mexico. Individuals will face criminal prosecution under the United States immigration law.
And scientists from the University of Miami, the Florida Aquarium, and Taylor Coral in Honduras are in fact transplanting crossbed coral fragments onto a reef just off Miami's coast. Now, the reef was devastated by coral bleaching 2 years ago. The team is introducing corals from the Honduras, where warmer waters have in fact helped them to thrive, to increase the reef's resilience to rising ocean temperatures. Only on Tuesday, in fact, divers planted Eckelhorn coral fragments. It's a species critical for protecting shoreline. Here's more.
It's an exciting day. It's the end of a very long process. Beginning about 3 or 4 years ago, we had this idea that we really needed to try to help Florida's coral reef by introducing more diversity from around the Caribbean, recognizing that some of the biggest threats to corals, like climate change, are really global phenomena. And if you try to have Florida's reefs save themselves on their own, we could give them some outside help.